In Christ alone my hope is found. He is my light, my strength, my song, this cornerstone, this solid ground, firm through the fiercest drought and storm. What heights of love, what depths of peace, when fears are stilled, when striving cease. My comforter, my all in all, here in the love of Christ I stand. In Christ alone, who took on flesh, fullness of God in helpless babe, this gift of love and righteousness, scorned by the ones he came to save, till on that cross as Jesus died, the wrath of God was satisfied, for every sin on him was laid. Here in the death of Christ I live. There in the ground his body lay, light of the world by darkness slain, then bursting forth in glorious day, up from the grave he rose again. And as he stands in victory, sin's curse has lost its grip on me. For I am his and he is mine, bought with the precious blood of Christ. No guilt in life, no fear in death. This is the power of Christ in me. From life's first cry to final breath, Jesus commands my destiny. No power of hell, no scheme of man can ever pluck me from his hand, till he returns or calls me home. Here in the power of Christ I'll stand.
The text was, words of Jesus, John 10:10. The thief comes both to kill and to steal and to destroy, but I have come that they may have life and have it more abundantly. And we spent time talking about the abundant life that a Christian should be living. Life more abundantly. And then Jesus continues in another place, and I'm going to tag this on and bring it together. This is life eternal, to know thee, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom thou hast sent. We'll be talking about God. We've talked about the grace of God last night. We've talked about the blessings of God. And I want to eventually get to talking about the God who carries. The God who carries. And you'll see in a few minutes why I'm going in that direction. And there is, I would call it, an apocryphal story told by the Jews about Abraham as a boy. They say that when he was a boy in Ur of the Chaldees, his father kept an idol shop. And his father went away on business and left the shop in the hands of the young boy. While he was away, Abraham, or Abram as it was in those days, took a club, and with the club he smashed every idol in the shop, with the exception of the largest one, into whose hands he put the club. When his father Terah came back and looked around and saw the devastation, he said, "Who hath done this?" And Abraham said, "The idol hath done it." And Terah said, "How can that be? The idol cannot see or do anything." And Abraham, according to Jewish tradition, is supposed to have said, "Please let your ears listen to what your mouth is speaking." And in that way, again, according to Jewish tradition, he turned away his father from idolatry. And in that way, they're trying to get you to believe that through their father Abraham, way back to his time, they have always been true to the one true God. But of course that is not really true. That's just a fable, and I think it's a fable that they have conjured up in order to somehow get hold of Joshua chapter 24, verse 1, where Joshua says, your fathers, Terah and Abraham, they lived on the other side of the river, and they worshipped many gods. That's the origin of first of all, the Hebrew, the Israeli, and finally the Judean nation. They have not always been faithful to God, and if you consider the history, I think you can understand why. You remember that at the time of they were going into Egypt, only 76 souls went into Egypt. And that should give you an inkling as to the reason for the 415 years of slavery, or of living and slavery in the land of Egypt. 76 souls, and God had promised Abraham that of him he would make a great nation. Many, many thousands came out. Moses himself speaks of having 800,000 men to whom he's responsible. And besides the Israelites who came out of Egypt, there were other tribes came out who'd been taken captive by the Egyptians. But the 415 years in Egypt gave those 76 souls the opportunity and the time to develop into the promised nation, numerically promised, that God had made to Abraham. Now, certainly, God revealed himself to Abraham. Don't get the idea that Abraham sought after God. There's not a word in the Bible that says that Abraham sought God. It was God who sought Abraham. God saw the possibilities in that man, and God used him, just as he used many other people, calling them in the same way throughout Old Testament history. God called Abraham, revealed himself to Abraham, made 7 promises to Abraham. And on that basis, through Abraham there came Isaac and Jacob, and the 12 tribes, and the multitude of people. Now, did they worship the one true God in Egypt? They certainly didn't. They didn't know the one true God. They knew the Egyptian gods. There were so many Egyptian gods. There were personal gods, family gods, tribal gods, national gods, and they all had names. And that was a problem for them, because when God called Moses at the burning bush and informed him, I'm going to send you to Pharaoh to tell him to let my people go, Moses said, I don't know who you are. I don't know your name. And surely Pharaoh's going to say, who is this God that you're coming about? God says, say, I am has sent me. I am, first person singular, the verb to be, present tense. I am. In the Hebrew, it's the word hava. Later on, God changes that. A little later on, we have him saying, I shall become. He uses the word that we have turned into Yahweh or Jehovah. That is the first person singular, present, future tense. So the one who says I am said to Moses, I shall become. In other words, I shall become to my people whatever my people need. Now I know that today we use the name, at least some people do. I do not use the word Jehovah, because it's not a biblical name. It's a name concocted in the 13th century by the confessional priest to Pope Leo X. And he took the names of God, Yahweh, the 4-letter name, the sacred tetragrammaton, the name of 4 letters, YHVH, and from the name Adonai, which is the word for Lord, he inserted the vowels and created the word Yahovah. And when William Tyndale made translation of the Bible into English, he converted that word into Jehovah. So whenever the Jehovah's Witnesses come knocking at your door telling you that you ought to be talking about Jehovah, you can tell them it's not in the Bible. It's a concocted, it's a mongrel name produced by a Roman Catholic priest. But God says, tell him, I am has sent me. Now, and certainly that's exactly what would happen. Pharaoh would want to know the identity of this God whom Moses represented. And, consequently, God revealed himself as the one who becomes to his people whatever his people need. And by the way, that is the definition, that is the explanation given by our brother Rotherham in his emphasized Bible, which is accepted by biblical scholars. It's accepted as genuine. God is the becoming God, the God who will become to his people whatever his people need. But bear this in mind, you see. They have spent so many centuries in the land of Egypt, surrounded by the constant polytheology of the country, many gods. They haven't worshipped the one true God in Egypt, and that's why they didn't know him, and that's why Moses had to ask, who are you? Now, it's not surprising then that under those circumstances, that time and time again, in those early books of the Bible, you find God emphasizing the oneness of God. Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4, Hear, Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord. That's the English translation. It is actually Shema Israel, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. The Lord is one. The Lord is our God. And that had to be repeated time and time again. They had problems all through the wilderness journey because the 400 years in Egypt had not only instilled this slave spirit in them, but also ignorance of the one true God. It's not surprising that when God at Sinai, as recorded in Exodus 19 and 20, the very first commandment that God gave to his people was, you shall worship the Lord, or Yahweh, your Adonai, one God. The very first commandment. And that was drummed home time and time again. And it was necessary. Why? Because up to now these people had been shepherds. Even before they got to Egypt, they were migrant shepherds, following the seasons for the flocks and herds that they kept. They went down to Goshen, a gift to them from Pharaoh, because it was a rich pasture land, and in any case, the Egyptians didn't like sheep. A shepherd was unclean, so that he wanted to keep them away from his people. But down in Goshen, they flourished. But then, they're going to get to the land of Canaan. And in the land of Canaan, they're going to find idolatry. And they're going to have to change their way of life. They're going to occupy lands that they have not prepared. They're going to occupy cities they haven't built. Does it occur to you that in those early days, the Israelites never built a single city? They were tent dwellers. They didn't see a city until they got into Egypt, and then they saw the magnificent buildings of Egypt. But they didn't build cities themselves. But when they got to the land of Canaan, there were cities, fortified cities. Consequently, they're going to have to change their lifestyle. They can't continue to be shepherds and they come along to the Canaanites and they say, well, how do we cultivate the land? And the Canaanites said, well, you have to worship the Baalim, the owners. The word Baal means master or owner. You have to worship the Baalim. And furthermore, if you want the ground to be fertile, you have to follow the example of the Baal and his consort. That involved sexual activity. And that is why in all idolatry there was a sexual activity. Because they were supposed to be imitating the behavior of the gods to bring fertility to the land. The Philistines, for example, who came in from the sea, were corn growers. So let me make one point that I should have made a moment ago. When Abraham traveled first into the land, by the way, his name is Abraham the Hebrew. The first time the word Hebrew is used in the Old Testament, chapter 12. Abraham the Hebrew, and it literally means Abraham, the man who crossed over. What did he cross over? He crossed over the river. And so the descendants of Abraham were also called Hebrews, people who crossed over from Mesopotamia. But in those days, when he's traveling in the land of Canaan, he can go where he will. It was not populated. But in the time they spent in Egypt, Canaanites have come in from Mesopotamia. Philistines have come, the sea people have come in and populated the land. So they weren't free to wander as he had been. And so they had to say, well, how shall we cultivate the land? And the Canaanites had to teach them, you must worship the Baalim. Consequently, God said, when you get there, remember there is one God. Yahweh is your God, and him only shall you serve. Of course, they didn't do it. It wasn't very long before they fell back into idolatry. And the ministry of the prophets was not originally designed to reveal future things to his people, but the ministry of the prophets was to warn against idolatry and to strive to bring the people back to the worship of the one true God. This is Jeremiah, for example, two lovely chapters, chapter 10 and 11, where he deals with the folly of idolatry. He calls it stupid and foolish. Isaiah follows him, and they both use the same kind of illustration. They both talk about a man who comes into the forest, he chooses a tree, he cuts down the tree, he cuts it in two. With half of the tree he carves an idol, with the other half he makes a fire and cooks his dinner, and then he falls down in front of the idol that his own hands have made. And that is what Jeremiah calls stupid and foolish. And it went on like that. And God didn't tolerate it. Isaiah chapter 40. But the one that begins, and I'm sure you know it, comfort ye, my people, saith your God. Then he goes on to say, to whom then shall you liken me? And he says, the workman makes an image that cannot be moved, decorates it with chains. He that is too poor for such an oblation chooses a tree that will not rot, seeks to him a cunning workman. And then he goes on to say, have you not heard? Sarcasm. Have you not heard? Hath it not been told you from the beginning? It is he who sits on the circle of the earth. And that's an interesting point. If we're not talking about a circle on a flat plane, we're talking about a ball. The word kug means a sphere. It is he that sits on the sphere of the earth. Long before people discovered that the earth wasn't flat, it was there in the Bible, if only they had the sense to see it. It is he who sits on the circle of the earth, and the inhabitants thereof as grasshoppers. He takes up the isles as a very little thing, and Lebanon is not sufficient to burn, nor the beast thereof for a burnt offering. To whom then will ye liken me, or shall I be equal? In chapter 44, God says, I am the first, and I am the last, and beside me there is no other. And you may be interested to know that the Hebrew word for truth consists of the first and the last and the middle letter of the Hebrew alphabet. God says, I am A and I am B. I have all the letters in between, and there's nobody like me. Then in chapter 46, Baal stoopeth, Nebo bows down. They load their idols onto beasts of burden. They have to be carried because they can't walk. And then God says, and here it is, you shall not carry me from birth to old age. I will carry you. Even when your hair is turning grey, I will carry you. That was the difference. The difference between the idols that these people had worshipped so frequently against the will of God, were absolutely helpless. But the God whom we ought to be worshipping was the God who didn't need to be carried, the God who would carry them. I'm going to be talking about that tonight. The God who carries. Push you see, we know all about that idolatry. We don't worship idols today. We know that the idols were a burden to these people that they had to carry. But we're not. No, we don't. Don't you? Don't you? Is your religion not a burden to you? It is to some people. They find it very difficult to get out of bed on Sunday morning to come to service. Find it very difficult to maintain their responsibilities to God because of their faith. Remembering probably many years ago, one man said to me, "Frank, I get nothing out of the service." And I said to him, "Roger, shall I tell you why you don't get anything out of the service? You don't put anything into it." He came along, you see, for spiritual massage, to set him up for the rest of the week. He came along for treatment. And even that really didn't work, because he always came right at the last minute and left immediately after the service was ended. Now that man's religion was a burden to him. And there were many people for whom their religion is a burden. Many Christians who don't enjoy the kind of life I talked about last night. A life that is abundant, beautiful, full, rich, full of joy, not happiness, full of joy. He was a miserable kind of soul. And I'm sure that his religion didn't do him very much good. Now, I hope that doesn't apply to any of you. I'm sure it doesn't apply to you, does it? You never find your religion to be a burden, do you? You never find your responsibilities hard to bear. At least I hope not. Let me ask a question. What transforms a religion that is a burden? What transforms a God that's a burden into a God that will carry you? What transforms our God from a God whom we have to carry to a God who will carry us? I'll tell you what it is. It's the fact that God, as believers, as born again, it's people don't born again. That is a ridiculous expression. If you're not born again, you're not a Christian. I only know of born again Christians. But because you're a child of God, God is your Father. And because God is your Father, He will do what any father will do. He'll carry you. I remember when I was a boy living in Hindley, we used to go to Borsdale Wood with my dad. And my little legs got tired. Now what do you suppose I said? What do you think I said? I said, "Dad, carry me." And he did. He swung me off my feet and he put me on his shoulders, and we marched triumphantly back home alone, like that, with me looking out over his shoulders and seeing, having a wonderful view, and me thinking how strong my dad was. Well, God wants to carry you. That's what God said to His own people. He said, all the way from Egypt to Canaan, as a man carries his own child, I have carried you. And they didn't realize that. They didn't realize that the God who created them was the God who wanted to carry them. But we forget that, don't we? I like the story of the hitchhiker. He was on a hiking holiday in Ireland, and he had his pack on his back. And you know, they talk about carrying the kitchens. I think he must have had everything except the kitchen sink on his back. You've seen the packs. They have packs sometimes, and they've got boots that look like deep sea divers' boots on, and you wonder how they managed to enjoy a holiday like that without on their back. Well, this fellow got rather tired, and he saw a farmer coming along with a little truck, podium truck. So he waved him down and said, "Would you mind carrying me into the next village?" And with that natural courtesy that you get among the Irish people, the farmer says, "Yes, surely, step up into the trap." So the man steps up into the trap. He's sitting next to the driver, the farmer, and they're going along the road, and the farmer suddenly realizes that the fellow still got his back on his back. He said, "Why don't you take that up and put it in the bottom of the trap?" "Oh," he said, I appreciate you. You're willing to carry me. I didn't think you'd be willing to carry me middle as well." We're like that. We believe, don't we, that God has removed the burden of sin from us, but we don't think He's willing to take the other burdens that life sometimes imposes on us. We think we have to carry the loads alone. And it's not like that at all. God, the God that we worship, the God that you ought to be worshipping if you're not a Christian, is a God who will carry you. He'll give you the forgiveness of your sins. He'll give you the power to live a Christian life. But at the same time, He will help you in life with the burdens that are sometimes imposed upon you by circumstances. People carry all kinds of burdens. We sometimes sing a hymn, don't we? Oh, what... How's that go with oh, what needless pain we bear, all because we do not carry everything to God in prayer. Is that true, isn't it? Is it not true that very often we struggle along beneath burdens that God never intended us to carry because we don't have the faith to believe that He's willing to relieve us of our burdens? But we have a God who will carry us if only we have the faith to let Him try. There's that other passage there that says, the eternal God is your refuge, and underneath are the everlasting arms. We put these on plaques and we stick them on the wall. Is that all they're fit for? Just ornaments? Or is that a reality, a biblical truth? That God is your refuge, your hiding place, and all the time underneath are the everlasting arms. There's another illustration that I like, where God says to Moses and to the people, as an eagle carries its young, so I have carried you. This is Leviticus 31. Think of that, what Moses is talking about here. Traveling through the Sinai Peninsula, there are mountains there. Never saw many mountains in some other places. And there in the ears were the great eagles, with a wingspan as much as 7 feet. And I honestly believe that at some time Moses had seen the way that the eagles had behaved with the young. There they are in the nest of that crag high on the cliffside, and the little birds, they've developed their wings, but they're too scared to fly. So what does the mother do? The mother beats her wings over the nest, and those little creatures with feathers are tumbled out of the nest, and they begin to fall, and they do what God expected them to do. They begin to stretch their wings, but they're inexperienced, and because they're inexperienced and weak, they get tired. And what does the bird do? The bird sweeps down and catches them on her wings, soars up to higher currents of air, performs a somersault, topples them off again, and they begin to fly a little bit stronger this time, until eventually they're able to fly properly. That's how God dealt. God said, I beat my wings over you in Egypt. I brought you up. They didn't want to leave. In the course of that wilderness journey, they were asking, why did you bring us out of Egypt? We missed the fish. With pity. And they weren't salmon either. We missed the fish. And the onions and the leeks and the garlic and all these things. And all we've got is this stuff you call from heaven, manna. The word manna is from the Hebrew that means, what is it? Manna. What is it? They didn't know. But God fed them with that, and that's when, of course, He gave them the quail as an extra diet. However, that is the God we're talking about today. I'm talking about the God who loves you so much that He's willing to carry you. And I would love to believe that I'm able in some way to strengthen the confidence and the faith that this congregation has in the God it claims to serve. It's very important. I like the passage in Peter. Peter says, casting all your cares on Him, for He careth for you. Think about it. The word casting, it means unloading. Unloading. And it describes, in the sense of a once-for-all action. Unload once and for all your cares. And the word for cares, menimna, means your anxieties. The things that drive you to distraction. Unload all those things that drive you to distraction on Him. What am I talking about? I'm not talking about anxieties that we sometimes have, or little cares, little worries that we sometimes have. How can I explain it? Tomorrow's Monday. I don't know if you've got you sisters do the wash on Monday. Let's suppose you do the wash tomorrow morning, and you get a day like you had yesterday morning. That was really bad, wasn't it? You've got the line loaded with the clothes, and it begins to rain. Just about midday. Now, of course, your school's on holiday. Let's suppose schools are in tomorrow, and the children come home about 12 o'clock for the lunch, which you've got it in the oven. And so you're so busy getting the clothes in out of the rain that you forget the oven, and the dinner begins to burn, and Johnny comes home screaming his head up because he's fallen and his knee's bleeding. Would you call that just a care? Wouldn't you call it a distraction? Wouldn't that really worry you? Well, that's the intensity of the word. It's one of the most intense words you can find in the Greek language. Unloading all those things that drive you to distraction on him. For he careth. And it's a different word. Would you believe it? It's a different care. It's a word that means he cares without distraction. Do you know, and I really mean this is something I've tried to get my head around for many years. I cannot fully comprehend that the one who created and sustains the universe is capable of thinking about me and my problems and my anxieties, my distractions, as though there were nobody else in the world but him and me. That is what the word means. God's able to think about you as though there's nobody else in existence but you and him. Unload all the things that drive you to distraction, because he cares without being distracted for you. That's the God who cares. That's the God that Christians know. Enjoy. When I was at school, for a time they sent me to a Church of England school. I had to learn the catechism. And one of the questions is, what is the chief end of man? And the answer was, man's chief end is to glorify God and to enjoy him forever. Now that's not modern English, but it is English. En as a prefix means in. Joy as a verb means to rejoice. To glorify God and to rejoice in God forever. That's a possibility when you recognize the relationship that you have with God. The intimacy of the relationship that God has with every individual child of his is something that beggars the imagination, something we cannot comprehend. I told you about the love of God last night. For the benefit of those who were not present last night, John says, behold, see, an exclamation, what manner of love. And I told you that the word manner there is the word that gives us, well, in English it's translated exotic. See what an exotic kind of love. A foreign, the word exotic means foreign. What a foreign kind of love the Father has bestowed upon us, that we shall be called the sons of God. Aren't you happy that you're a child of God? Doesn't it give you confidence in a world like ours today, when you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow or the day after that? Look, if you're a Christian, whatever happens in the political sphere, the economic sphere, international sphere, your security is guaranteed by a Father who loves you. And nothing can ever go wrong. That doesn't mean to say that your way to heaven there's going to be a rose-strewn pathway. But underneath are the everlasting arms. The wings of God are there. And they'll catch you when you're falling. And they'll help you, they'll support you. Now, I don't know everybody present tonight.
Time is filled with swift transition. Naught of earth unmoved can stand. Build your hopes on things eternal. Hold to God's unchanging hand. Hold to his hand, to God's unchanging hand. Hold to his hand, to God's unchanging hand. Build your hopes on things eternal. Hold to God's unchanging hand. Trust in him who will not leave you, whatsoever years may bring. If by earthly friends forsaken, still more closely to him cling. Hold to his hand, to God's unchanging hand. Hold to his hand, to God's unchanging hand. Build your hopes on things eternal. Hold to God's unchanging hand. Covet not this world's vain riches that so rapidly decay. Seek to gain the heavenly treasures, they will never pass away. Hold to his hand, to God's unchanging hand. Hold to his hand, to God's unchanging hand. Build your hopes on things eternal. Hold to God's unchanging hand. When your journey is completed, if to God you have been true, fair and bright the home in glory, your enraptured soul will view. Hold to his hand, to God's unchanging hand. Hold to his hand, to God's unchanging hand. Build your hopes on things eternal. Hold to God's unchanging hand. If for the prize we have striven, after our labors are o'er, rest to our souls will be given on the eternal shore. Home of the soul, beautiful home, there we shall rest, never to roam, free from all care, happy and bright. Jesus is there, he is the light. Oft in the storm, lonely are we, sighing for home, longing for thee. Beautiful home of the ransom beside the crystal sea, the crystal sea. Yes, a sweet rest is remaining for the true children of God, where there will be no complaining, never a chastening rod. Home of the soul, beautiful home, there we shall rest, never to roam, free from all care, happy and bright. Jesus is there, he is the light. Oft in the storm, lonely are we, sighing for home, longing for thee. Beautiful home of the ransom beside the crystal sea, the crystal sea. Soon the bright homeland adorning, we shall behold the glad dawn. Lean on the Lord till the morning, trust till the night has gone. Home of the soul, beautiful home, there we shall rest, never to roam, free from all care, happy and bright. Jesus is there, he is the light. Oft in the storm, lonely are we, sighing for home, longing for thee. Beautiful home of the ransom beside the crystal sea, the crystal sea.